Well, I love the book of John, and this that you've just read is a wonderful story with all of these rich layers of meaning. But to get into those layers, we need to start really at the end of the passage. Do you notice in verse 11 we read that this was the first of the signs which Jesus performed? And it says there that through these he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Well, teachers have long noted that John's gospel is really organized around two sections. The first we've come to call the Book of Signs, and the second we refer to as the Book of Glory. The Book of Glory goes from about chapter 13 all the way to the end of the gospel, and it's focused really on just the last week of Jesus' life. The Book of Signs, on the other hand, begins just after that long opening poem in John's gospel, or what we call the prologue, and then it carries all the way through to the end of chapter 12. And it really tells the stories of Jesus' ministry. But unlike the other Gospels, these stories are not organized in a timeline of events, but rather they're structured around these 7 signs or miracles that Jesus performs. And as we read, as you noted, this is the first of those signs. Now, I said there, a sign is kind of like a miracle. But it's a miracle that's wanting to point the reader into something deeper, a deeper truth about Jesus. It's a sign. It's pointing to something, as it says, to help the disciples, to help you and I believe. Now, today's sign takes place at a wedding in Cana of Galilee. And in the story, Jesus makes wine so that a wedding party can carry on. But he doesn't, if you notice, and I'm sure you did, he doesn't make just a little bit of wine. He makes a lot of wine. We're talking 180 gallons of wine to be exact, which works out to 682 liters for those of you using the metric system, or 853 standard bottles of wine by today's measurement. That is a lot of wine. But we remember that this is a sign. And so more than just Jesus kind of wanting to help his friends out and bail them out in an awkward situation, we need to recognize that something deeper is at work. And John tells us that this something deeper, in this, Jesus is wanting to reveal something of his glory, and he's wanting to help his disciples to believe in him. So we ask the question then, well, what is he's saying? What is happening here? Well, to get at the answer, we need to break the story apart a little bit, like, kind of detectives, and ask a few questions of what we're reading. And as we do so, I think we need to remember the Hebrew Scriptures, what we tend to call the Old Testament, because the clues to the sign are all embedded in the sacred scripture of the people who were first being given the sign. So first off, we read that the sign takes place at a wedding. That's the context. And if you've ever read the Bible cover to cover, you'll know that this is an interesting setting, because from beginning to end, the wedding is used in many occasions as a metaphor. And one of the key ways it's used, particularly in the Old Testament prophet Hosea chapter 2, is that one day God says he is going to come to his people, and when he does, he will gather his people to himself like a groom gathers a bride to himself. And that's our first clue. We don't have much yet, but something interesting is taking place. Given all that context, isn't it interesting that Jesus would choose to have his first miracle, kind of his coming out party, so to speak, at a wedding? Could it be that this was kind of like initial wink, wink, nudge, nudge? Could it be that Jesus was saying that the hopes of Hosea were coming true, that in him God was coming to his people as a bride comes to as a groom comes to his bride? In that day, everyone in Israel was praying that the words of Hosea would come true. And as you read this opening sign, you're left asking, could it be that Jesus was saying that in him it was all taking place? Well, then we read on. And we see, if you note there in verse 6, that in order to perform his sign, Jesus uses these 6 ceremonial jars. The jars were were central to Jewish worship. Before the people would enter into a sacred space, they would splash themselves with water from the jars as a kind of a way of symbolically cleansing themselves, washing away their sins prior to worship. But do you notice a little kind of telling detail in there? The jars are empty. It's like their ability to cleanse is gone. They contain no water, nothing of worth. And we ask ourselves again, is that another part of the sign? Is it saying something? Were those old cleansing rituals coming up empty? Was something new now needed? Something better? Was new wine needed to fill up those old wineskins? And so what does Jesus do with them? Well, he takes these empty jars and he fills them up with something new. He fills them up with wine, but not just any wine, the best wine. The host remarks that you've saved the best for last. But to get the full scope of this, we need to go again back in the Old Testament. Because wine was also like one of these word pictures that was used in the Old Testament, and it symbolized a couple of things at least. First, wine was always seen as a sign of God's blessing. When the Old Testament spoke of wine, it was usually a mark that God was pouring himself out in a lavish way on his people. But secondly, wine was also at various places used as a symbol of blessing for a unique day, the day that the Messiah would come. When the Messiah came, it would be like wine, the scripture says, oh, beautiful wine being poured out on the people, a great day of blessing. One of the examples of this is from the Old Testament prophet Amos. Amos chapter 9, it says this beginning in verse 11. In that day, I will restore David's fallen tent. I will repair its broken places. I'll restore its ruins and build it as it used to be. So he's talking about this future day of restoration. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will be overtaken by the plowman and the planter by one treading the grapes. New wine will drip from the mountains and flow from the hills. I will bring my exiled people Israel, and they will rebuild the ruined cities, and they will live in them. They will plant vineyards, and they will drink their wine. They will make gardens, and they will eat their fruit. So do you see what's happening here? Remember, it's a sign. The wedding of the Messiah promised in the prophets, it was happening now. In Jesus, God was coming to his people. The jars of Israel had run empty. Their day was done, but now Israel was being filled up with something new, something better. The best was being saved for last. And it was all just like Amos and the rest had said, that in that day, when the Messiah came to his people, they would know, because there would be so much blessing. It would be like wine flowing, dripping down from the mountains. This was a sign. Jesus making 180 gallons of wine, 800 whatever bottles. He was saying something to the people. The day of their long pent-up longing and the day of blessing had come. The best had been saved to the last. The writer of Hebrews would say later, in the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets and many times and in various ways, the prophets. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son. He's saved the best to last. So what do we do with this sign? Well, that's easy, right? We believe, that's why it's there. But the story, if you notice, also contains like the most important instruction that's ever given in the scriptures. I don't think that's hyperbole. Did you notice it? It comes from Mary. Mary goes and she speaks to the servants about the problem that they're in, and then she points to Jesus and she says, "Do you see that guy over there? Do whatever he tells you to do." That's it. Right? The blessing has come, the Son has come, and our response, we follow him and we do whatever he tells us to do. May the Lord bless you and keep you as you meet together.